I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about being relevant and making your classes matter. Because the most important thing you can do as a teacher is to give your students the gift of helping them understand why what it is that they're studying or learning will matter. This is the pandemic edition. So, what does it mean to be relevant? Well, first, there are three circles that you see here. There's a circle of concern, a circle of interest, and a circle of usefulness. And I said to myself at one point, circle of concern, circle of interest, isn't that the same thing? Well, not exactly. So, circle of usefulness we have defined. Why do I need to do it? Okay. Circle of concern. Well, when you look at the word concern, concern means that, wow, this impacts me somehow. I care about this, but I might not necessarily want to know anymore. Circle of interest may not impact me, but I'm interested in learning more about it. So, what you want to do is to find that happy medium or circle here in the middle where it is the juxtaposition of concern, interest, and usefulness. So, it's only relatively relevant if it touches one of these two generations. And I'm going to talk about Generation Z because that's the generation that I know the most about, teach now. Basically my entire career I've been teaching Generation Z. So I want you to notice a couple of things. All right, they were born between 1995 and 2010. There are 65 million of them. That's a lot of kids, a lot of adults. But most importantly, if you would look at the three parts underneath their ages: structured schedules, overmanaged, info and short grabs. Boom, pandemic edition. So now what are you going to do with this? Here you have a group of young adults, students, children who have been structured their entire lives. And the pandemic comes along and unstructures all of their structure. That is why there's a lot of struggle. They're overmanaged. Well, what does that mean? Well, that just means that their parents they have hands-on parents who are very concerned their well-being, their emotional well-being, all of that. So the pandemic has affected everyone in different ways. And there was a point at the beginning of the pandemic, you remember back in March, a year ago, April, mm, even into May, everyone was enjoying being together with no structure. Um, no management, just enjoying time together, weeding, growing gardens. I shouldn't say weeding, that didn't sound good, but growing gardens, creating all kinds of memories, baking bread, doing all kinds of things. That lasted for a little while, but then after 3 months, remember, they were structured. They had schedules. They were overmanaged. After a while, everybody got tired. And so, what do you do? All right, so then August comes along. Remember, we talked about info in short grabs. Well, if you're like me, I sit here every day for 90 minutes to deliver instruction. Well, I don't actually deliver instruction for 90 minutes, but that is our time period because that's our school schedule once we started second semester. Once we got some kind of structure back, because in the spring, it was definitely unstructured. But so what happens? All of a sudden they want info in short grabs. When we're in school, you give them 15, they turn with the partner, they come back, they move around the room. All of a sudden they're in the room. The room is their bedroom. They're in their house. They're wherever. They can't move. There's no info in short grabs. If you look at the next one, it says multitasker. So all of a sudden, it's no more info in short grabs. When they tune you out, they just start doing something else because they've tasked themselves to play a video game or send text or whatever. So you have to be really, really careful and conscious. And I think we will all be much better educators after this process because we won't have a choice. So I'm going to ask you this question, but I already know your answer. Do you want globally competent students after this year? Of course. No brainer. Of course. I put a maybe there. There might be some people that maybe want globally competent students, but maybe what it is they want globally competent students, but maybe they don't know how to get there. So let's talk about how we're going to get there. So first, your content is the what. Remember, you want globally competent students. You want the students to think about the circle of usefulness, the circle of interest, circle of concern. Those are all of the things that are there. So, what you teach, how you teach, these are the keys. So, first, what do you teach? We have the luxury of teaching world languages. What does that mean? We can teach. I don't want to say what we want, but to a certain degree that we have some latitude that perhaps some other areas don't have. But you have to be responsible in what it is you're going to teach. So you have to watch the news. You have to know your students' interests and you have to figure out a way to make it fun, but make it real. Because students know when you're faking it and students know when you're just going through the motions. I always call it schoolopoly. Like you're just going from point A to point B, and kids will play schoolopoly with you all day long. And so if you all of a sudden are no longer playing Schoolopoly and they're still playing Schoolopoly, it is so obvious. But anyway, that's another presentation for another day. But let's talk about delivery. How are you going to deliver? You have normal best, normal, and then you have the pandemic version. So your normal best is you walk in there, you're on your game, everything is humming and humming and humming. I can count that on a couple of hands. I was usually normal because there's always some interruption or something that would happen. Well, really, this virtual is kind of normal best because there are no interruptions. Well, there are interruptions sometimes. I had a student whose cat kept walking across the screen, but you don't have the typical school day interruptions. But there are all kinds of interruptions that we don't necessarily see when the cameras are off. So you got to think about taught is not caught. And I'd like to thank Linda Agnex for that. Until this day, to the end of my career, I will be saying, just because you taught it does not mean that your students caught it. So how are you going to reel in your fish? What are you going to use? What is your fishing pole? Your fishing pole? Well, I'm going to tell you what mine are. Flipgrid, Jamboard, Padlet. Side note, Sites and Voice of the Google Suite, along with Google Drive. I didn't list it, but I used it more as a house. So here's the things I use. I tried to streamline so that I was not using as much. I still ended up using a few other things like Quizlet for some practice, and I have to use our learning management system. But I tried the extras. I've honed them down to try and make it manageable for us. So I'm gonna talk about Flipgrid and all the things you can do with it, which I know most of you guys already know this. So I don't want to waste your time on teaching you a tool, but show you how I use these tools to make my classes relevant. So in the first case, you'll see that we have a written commentary. So my students are speaking using presentational mode and then responding using the interpersonal mode. So they're able, their audience all of a sudden is not just me. Their audience is their classmates, which would be their normal audience if we were in a classroom face to face. So here's one way in which I can make it relevant. So the students are all of a sudden realizing that they're not just talking to me. And that's important. That's very important because students take a little more care when they're talking to someone other than you. Now, we'll talk about what happens when that becomes such a big burden that maybe that's not the tool that you want to use in that manner until you have created some community. The second way is to have the audio commentary. So students are so used to writing on a piece of paper, but they don't often have an opportunity to express themselves. We're teaching language. We are teaching language. We want our students to be able to speak the language. We don't want our students to come back to us and say, "Oh, yeah, I had your class for 2 years and I can't say anything." No, 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 no. Those days are over. So that's the first way I use it. And this is an upper level class. So what happens when you get a class that's not so comfortable. So my Spanish 2 class I had in the fall, I realized was a special group of students. And when I said special group of students, they got all of the pandemic COVID wrapped up into one. They took Spanish 1 in March. I'm sorry, in January of last year. And we stopped our formal schooling in March of last year. So they had Spanish 1 for about 9 weeks. That's not a lot of time to get a real basis for a language. So, what did that mean? They went online, and it was optional at that point for them to do synchronous instruction. So many students chose to just remain asynchronous the entire rest of the semester. So they come into Spanish 2, and all of a sudden there is mandated synchronous sessions, and they're kind of overwhelmed. So I just show you to say by the end, we use Flipgrid for the students to be able to discuss. They chose one of the topics to be able to talk. And talking for them looked differently than talking where my upper level students were doing written comments and audio comments. I think I honestly, if we had been face to face, I would have at least gotten written comments in there. But I mean, you got to take what you can get in this case. And so having this set up like this, it was hidden because they wouldn't talk in class. They were terrified of each other because the community that had been built in my upper level was not there in my lower level classes at that point. So we had to work on community building first, and then from building community, them trusting me, and then from them trusting me to then trusting each other, and all of us working together to get to where we needed to be. My AP final was different. Everything was different. So I guess I should probably quit saying that. But I use Flipgrid here in a different way. The students signed up for an interview with me, and they were able to discuss with me a portion, and they recorded the rest. So that's how it was used. The students looked at what they had done well and where they still needed to grow. And this I used the AP exam, as you know, is not until May. Our school is on 4x4 block. And so as a result, our students have an entire semester to continue preparing for the exam. Well, first, to prepare, you need to know where you are. So the students worked very hard and they worked very diligently in the fall. So by the time we get to December, I wanted them to realize how much they had grown from the beginning to the end because, again, they started their journey in the midst of the pandemic as well. So the students were able to go into the Google Drive, and then all of the things that we had done, they had to pull out based on the modes, interpersonal, presentational, and interpretive, and look at their growth and show where they were at the beginning, where they were in the middle, and where they were at the end, and what they still needed to work on. And so this allowed me to use this same tool for a different meaning, but was more relevant for those students. So here again, I'm going to show you, in this particular case, there are all these little bubbles, and you may already know this, so you can fast forward past that if you don't. But here you'll notice in the red, this was where they were hidden. So that was where they couldn't see each other's comments. And so they felt more assured, especially at the beginning, where they were beginning to just say, they were able to tell me who they were, how old they were, where they lived. I mean, these were things that I thought were cemented in, and they kind of weren't. Um, no judgment. It just, that's where we were. And so I had started where we were, and we just kept going, and you'll see we did a lot of practice. There was a lot of formative, there was a lot of practice, a lot that was non-graded, to give them the confidence to speak, give them the confidence to take risks, give them the confidence to be able to talk to their classmates. And like I said, this was a very special class. So again, not only did they have the pandemic situation, this was a class of 27 children, or 27 students, young adults, of which 24 of them were males. Now, if you have any idea, I did not realize how shy males could be in a virtual learning environment. It was completely different. I don't think it would have been that way. So we had to overcome that to help them get to where they needed to be. Other things we did. So personalizing, making it relevant. Again, remember circle of usefulness, circle of interest, circle of concern. So in this case, it's going to be circle of usefulness and it's going to be circle of interest in some cases. Um, they had just had to tell me where they were, what time they got up. And we worked through this, and what the students were able to do was see where how their classmates responded in writing, and then they could imitate until they were comfortable enough and they changed what they needed to change so that it reflected their life. And so all of a sudden they realized that they are able to express themselves in Spanish, using a structure, structured as it should have been scaffolded, so that they could be more comfortable and begin to use those same structures in their spoken lessons. More practice set up like this. This became one of their favorite ways of working because they liked to write and they could see it in real time and they could edit and then they could go back and I could give them instant feedback and talk to them and say, okay, here's what I'm seeing. This is what we need to work on. Real simple items. This one blew me away because, again, using the same format, the students were working on their childhood, their descriptions, etc. And we get to Yo nací, and I was born. And so they started saying Yo nací in 2006, Yo nací in 2003, Yo nací in 2004. And, okay, instantly, what do you recognize? You need to go over numbers. No, you don't need to go over all of the numbers. You need to go over the numbers that are relevant for them to be able to give age. That sticks. When you start giving all that extra, it gets lost in short grab, info and short grab. All they need is dos mil seis, dos mil tres. They retain that. They write that. They record that. That stays with them. All right, Padlet. Another thing, again, everything to me was all about talking and classing. I like sticky notes, so as you can tell, so I found all the tech that had sticky note type things. Um, as the students was bullying a problem at school, and the students were able to discuss these short blurbs, using Padlet. You'll see Padlet used in a different way, um, from in last spring when we were talking about different themas. So this is a way again of talking about things that concern, that interest your students using your content. All right, so what are my other resources? So there are those ones. The resources when you want to create globally competent students, you probably have to look at what's going on in the world. And my favorite source is BBC Mundo because it's accessible for the students at pretty much all levels. You have to adjust a little bit, but once you can kind of give them some pointers, and don't give them the whole article, and depending on what level they are, but certain levels you can give a little bit more. And if you teach them the inverted pyramid or the journalistic technique, where the most important information is always going to be at the beginning, followed by more and more and more and more, maybe less and less and less important details at the bottom, then you hit that circle of interest. So if you are interested in knowing all there is to know about spirulina, which is one of the things that we're doing now, the Mexican superfood, then you read all the way to the bottom. If you're just doing it because it's useful, meaning I have to do this for class, and so therefore, then you read just the top part at the bottom, and you've completed what you needed to complete. So here's what the way I would set it up. I would choose an article from BBC Mundo, and then from there we talk about what are the main ideas. So again, we look at the what, the who, the when, the where, the how. So if I'm doing this with the Spanish 2 class, we literally are looking for who are the people mentioned in the first two paragraphs, where does the article come from, when did it occur? So you pull out information like that. I'm using it in my upper levels. I'm expecting them to still do that same thing, but they're able to express their ideas, using more information from the article. Even though they're upper level, they are still Mm, not they're pre-AP. So as a result, I'm still limiting what I'm asking them to do. Otherwise, you get past the circle of usefulness, circle of interest, and circle of concern because they're in the circle of panic. And that circle is not included anywhere in there. And so what happens? The students resort to Google Translating, students resort to Google Translating or mm, word referencing or Spanish dicting or whatever. So to keep it at a manageable level, I tell them I want 5 sentences. And from those, I want just a summary overall in their language. And I mean, I'm even though I say they will resort, mine still will try and resort, but we walk through the first article so that they know how to do it. Um, and then I asked them to summarize, tell me what happened in the article, find 5 to 8 vocabulary words, and I have a mix of native speakers, non-native speakers. So if it's native speakers who are well educated, and I mean, reading BBC Mundo is not super difficult if you are in that part, and I will say to them, and they might say to me, "Well, we know all of the words, or there are a few words, but they aren't necessarily relevant." And so I say to them, "Well, choose the words that are most important to be able to tell or explain what the story is about." And then they have to define those words. And then they finally have to put an image. And the image helps recall for them so that they don't find themselves having to reread the entire article. So I also use infographics in the same way. So again, you can see at this point we were talking about Ebola. So I've been doing this kind of technique. I really like it. You do have to be committed because sometimes it can be you have to help work through um, the grit factor. They have to have some grit to work through it. So you have to keep going back in and explaining kind of what's interesting. And then when they realize that they're talking about things that are going on in the real world that they can with they can talk with whomever, it slowly but surely it happens. So from Ebola, you can guess where we went. So we went to coronavirus. So at the beginning of January last year, here I was. I was like, oh, well, this is an interesting article. Let me think. Oh, a new virus. Oh, well, that matches. We've done Ebola. We done. I mean, they hadn't, but I'm thinking to myself, well, we've done that. We did H1N1. All right, so we'll throw this one in here. Little did I know. So they put in, and again, you can see this is an early article and they didn't define it this level, but you see it was a shorter paragraph. And if you see this picture here, that's definitely what you would expect to see when you're talking about coronavirus. There's a thermometer, there's a mask, man's getting his temperature taken, boom, boom, boom. Great picture. So my upper levels, what else did they do? Well, at that point, they did the summaries, but they also did PSAs, public service announcements, and that helped them to cement in what we were doing. Now at this point I would because we were face to face, we were using Google Voice more so than or just recording more so than using Flipgrid in that particular case. Well, we'll be using Flipgrid from now on. I mean, I like that, but that set them up. So how else did I use? Remember I told you about Padlet, another way, and so this is how I use Padlet with memes. So by the time we got thoroughly into our coronavirus adventures, I asked the students to find memes, cultural memes in the language that would express how they felt about coronavirus at that point. And I would say at this point it was probably April. So it was very interesting to see how they were able to share with their classmates and then they commented about which ones they liked and again, using things that are relevant to them, using simple tools that will allow the students to do what they need to do and express in the language. So the final couple of things are famous people. Again, AP themes. So this would fall under um, helping the students to identify who are the people that move and impact a society. And so the students read about Mafalda last year, and when we got to the fall this year, unfortunately, Keno passed, but the students had a point of reference. So when we got to the reboot of Mafalda this year, I added something about his impact in on the people, and they were able to see they read a couple of Twitter feeds where where people talked about how they learned to read using Mafalda. So again, the students had some kind of level of interest, why this was so important. We also always do things such as Dia de Muertos. We do all of those, the Dia de Virgen de Guadalupe. So we get to Dia de Muertos this year, and I say again, we're going to talk about how you change it. How do you make your class relevant? So the first version was a listening here, this Dia de Muertos. It was versión pandémica, and in this particular case, they talked about how Dia de Muertos was going to be different, and they had a calavera or skull with a mask over his face to show the impact in Mexico in this case, and then that's to help the students understand that this is real, that they're not doing some fake language. This is what's really happening. Evoked emotion in the second one. They saw a short film about a family, and then in the third one, connected to past materials and authors through music. Again, relevance, keeping everything connected. That's our third C. So I had the students had studied Ana Tijoux in Chile in Spanish 5. So by the time we get to AP, when Ana Tijoux records a new song about Dia de Muertos, there is some background knowledge for them, which allows them to really fully appreciate what is going on in this case. Argentina, pública versus privada. Again, identidades personal, persona, I'm sorry, identidades personales y públicas. The students learned a lot about Borges. We've changed a little bit this semester because we felt like some of the stories that we chose are we chose them because of the circle of interest. Like they were kind of gory because we would go back and do a Don Juan Manuel, and they did the one with the Mancebo, but again, it's a lot of emotion tied up and a lot of gore in that story. So we opted for a different version this time that was from Don Juan Manuel El Brujo Postergado, but that wouldn't necessarily evoke maybe some kind of the same kinds of problems if kids were suffering. So again, knowing your students, knowing the exercises. So I have exercises that are cultural that help the students to understand and focus on what's going on. Something as simple as CMPAs, which is a walk to school program where they would compare um, whether or not they had a program like that in the in their community with the Spanish speaking world, and here's that information there. And then finally, we get to relevance again more under the listening exercises. Just want to show you one in particular, Renata Flores. Uh, Young lady who is rapping in Quechua, the song from Cardi B. And so, again, the students are interested in different aspects. The ones that like music. The ones that are interested in learning Quechua, because they're just linguist types. They're interested for that reason. The ones that like Cardi B are trying to figure out how this girl learn how to do Cardi B in Ecuador. It's all kinds of things like that. So those are the things that keep our students interested. Black History Month, why not talk about this? Now, I'm going to say that I'm saying that because this is Black History Month, but I did this last fall. So I think it's important to do all the time, to include as just a normal part so that students again are relevant. I mean, it's relevant because circle of interest, if your audience happens to be black and you don't ever see any black people, then you may make a false assumption that perhaps Spanish is not spoken by black people, and that is not true. So it shouldn't just be if your audience is black, it should be to open up everyone's eyes to the diaspora and the fact that Spanish is spoken by a number of people, period. All kinds of people. Everybody has skin in the game, be it African Americans, be it Asian Americans, be it other indigenous people. So wherever you are, there's somebody that relates. Spanish is it's just a microcosm of the United States. So it helps that for students to see somebody that looks like them doing that because it increases their interest and increases their level of concern. So, my final reflection, again, I told you I used to Google Sites, and this was before. where the students were able to talk about their different their growth, and their growth again, it was based on the modes: the interpersonal, interpretive, and presentational. They also included in this particular group the cultural lessons, and because we had abbreviated classes, they didn't have as much to offer, and I didn't want them to spend as much time working on that particular section this year. But I wanted you to kind of have an idea of what it is. They set it up, they talk about themselves. So first they own the page. The page is a reflection of who they are, and then it becomes an at the bottom, the second paragraph is are their goals. Where is it they want to be? What is it they want to accomplish? And I always tell them, other than getting an A, what is it you want to walk away from this class having at the end? And then they talk about their reflections and they talk about their growth. So they start at the end. I told you the Google Voice. I put them at the end because what I had the students do was to call in August, and every 2 weeks or so, they had a Google Voice, which was like a simulated conversation. And from there, they went from August to December, well, August to the end of November. And then at the beginning of December, I would send them all their emails, all their Google Voices back, and they would listen to their progression again to include in their Google site. So, but that was the one that was blind. Like they would have not heard anything of that before. So I think that it's key to keep your classes relevant. If you have the opportunity, I had the pleasure of having one of my former students move to Colombia and start a business in leather. And this business was related to one of the topics we were studying, which was sustainability. And they were able to Skype with her and discuss her business and what it was like and how she learned Spanish and whatever they really wanted to ask. Because again, it was making that connection for them. Um, she now has two kids. She's a cartographer and has moved back to the United States. And the students in this picture have gone on to minor in the language. Three of them in whose backs you see the young man in the red shirt, the young lady in the plaid shirt, and then the young lady that's diagonal to her. So I, I think that we do ourselves a disservice if we don't make our classes relevant, and we do everything to create the next generation's global competent students, global competence young people, movers and shakers, because of what we do, and that's going to be to make it relevant. Thank you.